Great. So I think it's 2 minutes after the hour, wherever you're based. I would like to go ahead and start with the webinar. Usually we wait 5 minutes past. However, I want to make sure that we honor all of those of you that were on time. So the webinar today will talk about pay. This is something very interesting to everyone. It's also very timely as the talent pool is increasingly becoming more global. We have a global talent economy. We need to think about this question. It's a question that is could be controversial. We've seen where Facebook or Google will say, if you move to a lower cost city, we will reduce your pay. So we've seen many workers be very upset about that. And also we want to discuss, as we get more people from all over the world and they're working side by side, let's say California with the Ukraine, should they be paid differently if they're producing the same kind of work? So these are questions we'll answer today. We have a great panel coming from Remote, from Carta and Doist. I will introduce them in a second here. Yeah, can't wait to tell you guys a bit more. So why am I here? My name is Lana. I am the head of revenue at SafetyWing. I built out the B2B sales team last year from 0 to 14 people and 0 to a few million in revenue. I am now building out the partnerships team. I'm also a Y Combinator founder, as well as an advisor to many startups. So I've been in the startup scene for many, many years. I am a remote worker and I love remote work. So I do talk about these topics in different webinars. We have these monthly and started them about a year ago. It's cool to see that we started with just a few and now we have thousands of people joining. So very, very cool to see you guys here. Charles, if you want to go to the next slide. And by the way, Charles is helping me with this webinar, so you'll hear me call out his name. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about, we're going to go into a poll, then a panel discussion, and then the Q&A. Please remember that the Q&A is super important. I want to make sure that we answer all your questions. It's really fun when this is interactive. So please do think about your questions and put them as soon as possible into the questions area. That way we can get to them sooner rather than later. So Charles, if we want to go to the next slide. Okay, so who is SafetyWing and why are we here? Well, SafetyWing provides global benefits for the remote workforce. And what that means exactly, on the next slide, you will see that we started with Nomad Insurance, which is a travel insurance for nomads. And then we went to Remote Health, which is a fully equipped health insurance for remote teams, as well as hybrid teams. So as you're scaling globally, you're thinking, okay, how can I offer equal benefits to my global team? And this means remote retirement, maybe therapy, parental leave, income protection, all of these things to have really like a global suite of benefits that you can offer to your talent pool so that you stay competitive in this market. We can go to the next slide. So without further ado, I want to present to you the panelists today. So Amanda, if you want to turn on your camera, as well as Chase and David, we can start with you, Amanda. If you tell us a bit about yourself, your role at Remote. I also learned that you're employee number 20 and now you guys are 1,600. So please do go ahead.
Absolutely. So I am the Director of People Enablement at Remote, and we offer global employment and payroll solutions for our customers. Remote is a remote-first org. It's very suited for the name, and we currently have employees in over 50 countries. We're at about 800 headcount. I believe 1,600 was actually David's headcount for Carta, but we've grown incredibly so since I joined in June of 2020, and it's been really incredible to see. And I have been working remotely since 2017, so really excited to dive into this topic with everyone today.
Thank you, Chase.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Chase Warrington. I'm the head of Remote at Doist. We are also a remote-first organization that has been fully remote for about 15 years, and it's my job to make sure that we're running at peak efficiency in terms of remote work. So how we pay people and compensate those around the world in the 35 different countries that we have and teammates in is a core part of that. So very much so looking forward to this discussion and learning from those on the panel and talking about how we've approached this at Doist, because it is certainly not an easy subject to tackle.
David?
Yeah, welcome everybody. Want to first thank Lona and the SafetyWing team for having us. We think all know we're all kind of struggling with this particular issue, I think, as we move forward in the kind of the new normal, so to speak. So CARTA is about 1,500 employees roughly. We're in about 6 countries. I think we you know, are having some challenges around how we kind of normalize those pay structures. So this, I think, is really a timely panel discussion. CARTA's in the business of basically making owners. So we manage private firms' equity from cap table management to 409A evaluations. We have a number of other product lines as well in terms of tax and things like that. But the space is growing rapidly, and trying to just stay, you know, ahead of it all, I think is the challenge for all of us. So I really look forward to the discussion today to see what other challenges people have and how we can help, and certainly how everyone can help each other. I think it's a community, a global community, trying to figure out again, the new normal. So really thank you for having me.
Thank you, David, Chase, and Amanda. I think this will become a really great conversation so that we can kind of build the future together here, together with the attendees. So maybe next, Charles, you'll go into the poll. If you guys can answer this question, it'll be great. This way we can understand kind of like where everybody's at. So do you have a geographic differential policy in place today? So select one of the following: yes, not as a result of increased remote workforce; yes, as a result of increased remote workforce; no, but evaluating as a result of increased remote workforce; no, evaluating not as a result of increased remote workforce; and no, not considering any changes. Okay, so it looks like the majority is kind of split. So yes, 30% is yes, not as a result of increased remote workforce, which is interesting. But then we also have a good amount of people that have an increased remote workforce. So yeah, quite interesting. What do you guys think about these results?
It doesn't surprise me. You know, I think it's always a mixed bag. It's a very challenging topic, and you look at some of the other companies out there, especially some of the larger companies who are changing their policies on the daily, and it's very public how they're doing that. So I'm not surprised to see those results a bit all over the board, so to speak.
Interesting. Oh, great. Okay. Are you launching into another poll? Let's see.
Yeah, so I was just trying to bring the results back up to the screen here. That's all.
Okay.
So,
perfect. Maybe we should go on to the other one as well, just to see.
Okay, cool. 1 second here.
We have one more poll for you guys, and then we'll start the panel discussion. So how does your organization currently pay employees as it relates to geographic location? Number one is we pay employees based on location, we pay everyone the same amount, and then the last one, not sure. Would love to see what you guys answer here, because it'll actually kickstart this discussion. Great. Okay, so the biggest is we pay employees based on location. Interesting. And then the next one is the same amount. So about 23% of you said the same amount. This is cool. Okay, this is really interesting to know, so that we can kickstart this. Very excited. I actually wanted to bring up a couple things that I was reading. The first one was, you know, Amazon doubled its pay for managers. I don't know if you guys saw that, at 360K from 160 or 140. What was it before? And Apple was paying up to $180,000 bonuses. So of course, we're seeing this during the Great Resignation era, where people are moving around, going to different companies, both based on pay, benefits, but also whether they offer remote and hybrid work. So this is really interesting that we're talking about this today. And my first question for you guys is, let's talk about what you guys are offering in your companies and what do you think is kind of like the right thing to do now. I think no one has the right answer for the future, as I think people will tell, or the workforce will show us what is the right answer, because we can't just like make things up in a vacuum and then say, okay, you're going to be paid this. However, it depends how everyone responds, both employees and contractors, and they will determine what will be the future. So I'm curious, Amanda, what are you guys doing at Remote? And yeah, what are you guys thinking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we currently base compensation off of several factors. Some of that is geographic, cost of living, the rent index there. It's also alignment to market and industry benchmarks that we're finding. So we've noticed, there's some areas of our business that seem to have more competitive hiring and retaining of employees. So really looking at how we can apply as equal as possible a total rewards package to everyone at the company, and benchmarking across the teams and departments as a whole. I don't know if there's one right answer to compensation, I will say that. And it also may depend on where your organization is at in terms of growth, scaling, and maturity as well.
That's great. And Amanda, do you find it really complex because you guys have set up such a system where it becomes quite burdensome for the person that's hiring to figure out, okay, how am I going to pay this person?
I would like to think that we've made it as simple as it can be for now. We have a total rewards team that's really great and dedicated to supporting the recruitment team, but we also didn't get so granular that we're looking at each individual city and state in the US or province in Canada. We are really looking at kind of a broader picture, but we're also always looking at the feedback we're getting, not from hiring, but also our internal employees as well, to understand, are we aligned with what would be expected in the market or what a best practice would be? So again, I'd like to say that we start simply and then we build upon it, and that would be my recommendation for anyone who's looking to get into really a total rewards or compensation philosophy and practice, but it's easier said than done, for sure.
That's great. I'd love to follow up more on that question a bit later, but maybe you'll let David go next and tell us, what are you guys doing at Carta and how are you thinking about this for the future?
Yeah, we do utilize a geographic pay differential methodology, and it's challenging. Being in different countries, being subject to collective bargaining agreements, always being subject to the competitive market. We have I would say a pretty complex system we use, to say the least. But I think, it's really based in trying to kind of triangulate between our mobility policy and our hiring policy and our retention policies. When you start to look at the way the talent pool is expanding and markets are starting to come together, you're really seeing a big change in those market rates. When especially in the US Eastern Seaboard, there's just, it's so dense that remote work is difficult. You could have we have an office in New Jersey, we have one in New York, and people live right in between the two, and they're so close in proximity that it's kind of like, well, what do you do? They're kind of, close to both costs of living, if you will, and cost of labor. So, we look at it that way, and we've deployed, especially in the US, a geographic pay differential policy that kind of says, hey, how close are you to a major metropolitan area? Are you in commuting distance? Are you not? We're an office culture. We have moved to about 20% remote workforce over this past year and a half, 2 years. And so we're really dealing with this kind of right in our face right now. But I would say a couple of things relative to people who are trying to really kind of figure this out. And I would say that as you look at those policies, as you're looking at those strategies, it's important to kind of understand what that competitive market looks like, because ultimately that's where you're going to kind of try and attract your labor from. So as an example, if you're looking for, B2B salespeople, and I'm sure Lena can attest to this, the market has become super competitive. And so how do you kind of look at that and say, well, how do I cast that kind of larger net? Geographic pay differentials, I think, are important to a scaling company. And it's really just kind of a bottom line balance sheet issue. It's like you don't want to overpay, but you don't want to underpay either, and you want to remain competitive. So again, as Amanda said, you're talking to your talent team all the time, and you're looking at those industry benchmarks. You're really trying to take all the information in, and there is a ton of information. Just kind of trying to disseminate all that information to figure out what is best for your company, I think does become the challenge. But I think if you are mindful of those policies, of those strategies, and you kind of thread the needle, but then constantly monitor that and make sure it's working right. I don't think there's anything set in stone. The minute you become inflexible is the minute you kind of die. So it's really make sure you keep that tweak. It's organic in nature. So our policy is one we look at almost on a daily basis.
I love that. And yeah, so many questions come up for Carta actually, but I will let Chase go next and then follow up with you.
So we do use location in our compensation formula. So what the interesting thing to me has been, I think what David was alluding to, is we're reevaluating this constantly, and the significance that we've placed on location has deteriorated quite a bit in the 6 years that I've been here at DUA. So every third person on our team is from a different country, and we only have a couple people that are in the same metropolitan area. And so ours is very diverse across the two ends of the spectrum and everything in between. And what's been interesting is to watch location become sort of a smaller factor for us, but it still is a piece of the formula which we can dive into a bit deeper. But yeah, that's the short answer is we are still using location as a factor in the multiplier.
That's so great. And I will also share with you guys what we do at SafetyWing because it seems a bit different than what you three are doing. We are doing the flat salaries across where we picked a city that's in the higher bracket, not San Francisco, much lower than that. But then we pay everyone the same from there. That we also have a lower tier, which is the associate, where you come in and it's a lower tier, but then you can work to get to the strategy team, which is higher. And the more revenue we add to our table, the more we get paid a little bit more. So we get a little bump, when we get to that 20 million mark and the 40 million mark and so on. But it's really interesting too. Like we don't know. I mean, so far it's been great. Like we have pretty much 100% retention, but we also don't know what the right answer is. And it seems great. But then you think about, okay, what about those people that have a lot of experience? Let's say they're coming from San Francisco and we can't pay them San Francisco rates. Are we missing out on that talent? And then what about that person that's coming from a country like, I don't know, like Slovenia or Macedonia? And if we give them that amount, is that fair for the locals or that economy? So there's so many questions that come to mind. But yeah, I'd love to dive a bit deeper in terms of like, what have you guys seen as you're offering this location-based? How are you seeing the feedback from your employees? So maybe David, you can dive a bit more. Like you said, if you live near a metropolitan area, so like during COVID, many people moved around and now they're not as willing to go back to an office. What do you guys do then? Like, let's say that person is very talented. They could be headhunted by Google or Amazon or Facebook or Meta, if you want to call it. What do you do then? Like, do you say, oh, because you moved to Colorado, you're not able to get the same salary that you were getting in New York? And will that person be happy, or will that be a reason for them to leave?
Yeah, it's something that we battle with because ultimately we want to retain our top talent, and so that becomes a challenge. Currently, our policy is that if someone moves from a higher cost labor market to a lower cost labor market, we have no adverse pay actions. They get to keep that wage. Depending on where they have fall in terms of a comp ratio to that market, we may potentially freeze future salary changes until the market catches up. But the market typically ascends, so there's some amount of time where the market will catch back up. We also, I think Amanda said this in terms of the kind of complexity of all of different things that are total rewards. Look, part of it is direct compensation, but there's other things involved. So we're an equity company and we create liquidity, right? And so we compensate for that by using our equity. As you look across the kind of total rewards offering, there's many things people are interested in. We're really in the middle of this multi-generational, multicultural workforce, and everyone's kind of bidding for that talent. And so there's not one answer. Not everyone is locked into just pure base salary. Not everyone is locked into just equity. Not everyone is just locked into health benefits or remote work. And so I think you have to be really flexible in terms of, again, triangulating what those different labor markets and different kind of profiles of candidates that you're looking for happen to be. And so we have a lot of different kind of dials and levers to make sure that we're staying competitive in those markets and for kind of individual needs. When you look across performance management, career development, all the different things that are total rewards, there's a lot that we can offer. I think part of that, though, is to say that as you do those things, we don't want to have an administrative state that is too burdensome for the organization to manage as well. So there's a lot of education we do with our talent staff, with our managers, to make sure that people understand that, and that we communicate effectively around all the different offerings that we have, so we can kind of hit the sweet spot. As you look at those kind of, and this is my personal opinion, as you look at the people who are early in career, they tend to lean into cash, okay? Middle career is more around kind of benefits and starting families and things like that. Later in career, it's more around retirement. So we make sure that we kind of have that flexibility across the platform as people evolve through their career. And I think that creates a real comfort for Cartons in terms of they don't really have to think about that as they join Carta. I don't think people wake up one day and say, God, yesterday I was early in career and today I'm mid-career. Do we have parental leave? But when they do that and they see that we've already thought about that, I think there's a certain engagement that they have that, hey, the company has my back. They've made this investment for me and thought about it. So I think there's a lot of different levers around this, but certainly within the remote space, we're certainly adjusting on a very frequent basis in terms of how we do that. And in some cases, lifting geographic pay policies off the table and nationalizing our rates. We typically see that in our sales force for the most part. But again, tweaks and modifications constantly, as Chase and Amanda, as we all know. It's
yeah, that's
crazy.
Fantastic. Really good nuggets there, David. And especially like staying flexible. I think that's the name of the game, and being able to respond in real time versus being rigid like we used to be in the past. Many corporations used to do that. So this is great. I'm also going to, by the way, guys, please do enter your questions as you're hearing things from David, Amanda, and Chase, and you're like, oh, I have a question about this, because we can dive in deeper in these topics. I will post something here in the questions, actually, in the chat. Okay, let me see if I can. Okay, I will post this. We did this poll with Building Remotely, which is kind of like our blog, and we went through, I think maybe Remote we did a survey and we asked people, okay, would you prefer flat or location based? And 73% of the people said they preferred flat salaries. Everybody gets paid the same. So it's funny that people want something different. But I posted this here, as you guys can see. We interviewed a few different companies, whoever wanted to respond, and then we came up with some answers. But I'm curious to ask Amanda, actually, because you work at Remote, and Remote has been scaling very quickly. You also have visibility into those companies that are hiring globally. What are you seeing be a trend as they're hiring people globally? Are you seeing more flat salaries or more location-based for these newer startups?
Yeah, I think it really varies. I think a lot of companies tend to start at the location-based, and then maybe like Chase was saying with Doist, they kind of don't put as much weight on that location factor in the formulas. But we're seeing a lot of location-based. The one thing that Remote does is we do have a minimum salary so that we are applying our values and our mission of equality and equity to those who are in maybe areas that it would be normal to pay someone $20,000 a year, but we have a minimum salary of $40,000 US. It's not to say that anyone who's at that amount is at the lowest possible salary. It's that we're actually trying to lift them up and lift their location up to an extent, and then they can build from there as well. So that's just the starting point as well.
Cool. Chase, do you want to maybe add some color there in terms of Doist and how you guys are thinking about the future of this as you grow and you scale from 20 to 100 to 200, and how does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So to go a little bit deeper on where we are currently, we use what we call a function rate as sort of the base, which is similar to what you guys are doing, Lona. We have like a set percentile that a salary would be based on if you were in like a mid-level city in the US. And then we apply that using a paid partnership with PayScale, which helps us come up with a flat number that we can kind of use as like the base salary for somebody if they were living in a mid-tier city so that they could live really comfortably. Then we take that and we multiply what we call a mastery multiplier, which is sort of like, you know, your annual review and what your peers think of you and things like that gets added in to show how you're performing on the job. And then we use location as the last little bit. So that location can actually increase based on your cost of living. It can make your function rate increase or decrease by 5, 10, 15% one way or the other. So some things that we're thinking about as we evolve this is like something that David alluded to is what happens when someone moves. What happens when you have a digital nomad that moves every month and lives in a bunch of different countries, or when someone employs themselves in a tax-free country with very high standards and then moves and likes to spend most of the year in other parts of the world. So these are the kind of things that we've not completely perfected just yet, and we're starting to have to, because it's becoming, as remote work becomes the new norm, people are coming in with different expectations than they were you know, just a couple years ago. The Great Resignation is showing us this. So quite a bit to think about. And I think one thing that seems so clear so far is that nobody has like the perfect answer to this, but for us that has worked really well. You know, having a set base that everybody can be comfortable with, and then tweaking it from there, as opposed to going in the other direction, which was kind of what we did initially, putting a lot of emphasis on your location. And then therefore you're either starting from a really high bar if you're in San Francisco, you're starting from a really high bar, and if you're in another country or another city, you're starting from a really low bar. And we kind of flipped that upside down, and that's worked much better for our retention and for attracting talent.
Very interesting. And Charles, I'm not sure how we're doing on questions, but I have another question for you guys. If we don't have any from the audience, maybe we can start.
Yeah,
we have.
Yeah, so I started putting them into that Google Doc so you can take a look. We have over 30 questions.
Oh,
from our audience already. Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, feel free to start pulling some questions from there as well. We can start working through those here shortly.
Okay, so then maybe the last question I'll ask you guys before we go into everyone's questions is transparency, and how are you thinking about that? This came up in kind of like a brainstorming session we had with our team to make sure how the employee base stays happy, and what can we do as we grow to keep our culture and to make SafetyWing a great place, like we love all being there. So this came up, it was like a transparency in terms of salaries. Do you guys share that somewhere? We don't currently, we just say that we pay this amount, but we don't show like a total rewards package or anything like that. So I'm wondering how you guys are thinking about that.
We're literally having this conversation at Doist right now. We opened this up internally to ask the team what does everyone want. Of course, you get a very wide variety of responses, but we were curious to know, does the company want total transparency or no transparency or something in between? And we landed somewhere in between. There's a minority that wanted complete transparency. Something that came up in this discussion that honestly I had never thought about was that there were many people who lived in certain parts of the world where they said, if we go full transparency, I can't be here, because that would be detrimental that could be potentially dangerous and detrimental for me. And so that was one thing that kind of came to mind that I hadn't thought of before.
Wait, sorry.
So we landed somewhere in between.
How was it dangerous?
Yeah. If you were somebody that lived in a country where a salary of say $30,000 or $40,000 a year would make you quite wealthy, then that could be used against you in some sort of attack perhaps like kidnapping, ransom, things like
But
that.
it would
So,
only be like an
protection.
internal thing, right? Like the transparency would be internally versus externally, or still?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could how it would of course just be included internally, but you're just one tweet away from an angry former coworker or somebody sharing something publicly that shouldn't be. So that was the reason. That was one of the main reasons we decided not to go with full transparency. We've taken some steps to show further how people are being compensated. We're providing individual compensation reports and showing benchmarks company-wide, so people know roughly where they stand without knowing exactly what everybody in their team earns.
Amanda or David, do you guys have anything to add before we go to questions?
Yeah, I would just add that we currently don't share individual salaries, but we do share kind of our process and how we approach total rewards and compensation specifically. So we talk about what percentile we place ourselves in the market, and that location does play a factor in it, but so does performance, and very similar to what Chase was saying, the performance review process and things along those lines. And of course, there's always room for more transparency, and we'll likely move down that route. But I would also say that education is really important here. Not everyone's working in compensation day to day or total rewards, or they may not be familiar with some of those terms that you're throwing out or the formulas that you're presenting. So something that we did was, we have a lot of documentation on it, but I think we want to improve and increase the amount that we educate our team members on compensation, total rewards, what the different options are, and as well as why we chose to go location-based for certain things, and what factors to include in our compensation formulas.
Yeah, for us, we have a saying, and it's transparently untransparent. And I think what that means to me is that there's a lot of information. I think Amanda brings up a great point in terms of the complexity of compensation and compensation work to get to competitive market rates. When you look at the data that you grab from your talent team, when you look at the aggregators, the Radfords, the Mercers, the Willises of the world, the crowdsourced data, there's multiple kind of data points that we deal with to try and get people to kind of understand how all that plays into a competitive market rate. I think it's a loss leader in a lot of ways. I think when you provide total reward statements and let employees know kind of where they sit relative to those market conditions and all the things across that platform, and then what we really lean into is the kind of pay for performance piece. Here's the things you can do to make sure that that increases for you. If it be more equity, if it be more base salary, if it be any of the number of things that we offer in terms of performance, and connecting those two in a really transparent way. I think we're very transparent there. But relative to how we arrive at competitive market rates and what individuals are paid across the board, I agree with Chase wholeheartedly. You got to be really careful, especially in emerging markets, in terms of having that information public. And the minute you release it into your workforce, you might as well assume that it just got on the internet and everybody in the world knows about it. So you have to be really careful there. But transparently untransparent is the way we operate for the most part.
That's great. Okay, yeah, I do have an additional question to that, David, but I will go into the questions of the audience. So the first one that I see here is around what happens when people move around, and also what happens if they are a nomad, if they become a nomad. We already answered this, so maybe I'll move to the next one, but just to answer that part, especially if you're a nomad, if you're location dependent, it does make sense to offer some kind of a flat salary. That way, as the people are able to move around the world and bring their work with them, they're not so worried about, oh, is my pay going to go down if I'm in Bali for a month or if I'm in Mexico for 2 months. This works really well at SafetyWing because we just have that, flat salary, and people are just free to move wherever they want. It is a trend that I'm seeing, obviously, with a lot of young people, but also people with families like myself. I still move around quite a bit, so to feel that freedom that I can be able to do that without a salary repercussion is really fantastic. Yeah, happy if you guys don't agree there, if you want to chime in.
Well, I think there's a lot of nuance in what you just said. I would say tax implications, Does the company have entities set up to be able to actually pay you in whatever currency or whatever location you're in? I think there's some challenges around, some very real challenges around a nomadic workforce, at least from my perspective.
Yes.
Trying to, and especially when you look on the equity side of the equation, you know, where is that issued at? Kind of what are the tax implications of any given location? There's a lot there. It sounds great, I think, on the surface, and I would love to be able to provide that to everyone. I think you live a wonderful life, and being able to do that from a company perspective, I think that there's a challenge there that is almost insurmountable in some cases.
However,
so
David, I think that's a great point, but I think a lot of companies are solving many of these things. So take remote, for example, you know, they allow you to hire people compliantly in over 185 countries. So you're able to do a lot of that. I think there's other companies solving the tax issue for nomads as well as SafetyWing being able to provide you those benefits and have those benefits follow you wherever you go. Based on your nationality. So me being American, of course, having that passport, I have to pay IRS, you know, no matter where I am. And for me, it's very easy that if I'm 3 months in Europe or 4 months in Puerto Rico or wherever, I'm still paying my state tax and my federal tax. But you're right, like there's some countries where it's a bit more confusing and you have to be careful. But it is cool that a lot of companies are coming up with solutions to really help people live their best lives. You know, they don't have to quit and go live in a van. They can bring their job with them and travel the world, you know?
Yeah, I would just say, I would just say, like, with that, us being very centered around employment and compliance and just ensuring, and mobility as well, and opening up those borders. One thing that we do is we do support relocations because we have entities in so many countries. We can actually sponsor visas and things along those lines. But we also want to make sure things are, you know, compliant. So if someone is traveling a lot, typically we have our tax team get involved as well as our mobility or relocation team, and understand where are they spending the majority of their time, where are they going to be considered a resident, because even if you're traveling full time, you still have a residency somewhere. So as a US citizen, you likely have to, well, you'll always have to pay taxes in the US, no matter where your residency is. But a lot of countries will require that, right? If you're traveling, but that's still your home base. So that's something to keep in mind. And then with that, I would also say we as a company really want to allow people to live anywhere. That's our whole mission, is so that you don't have to move or choose where you live based on your job or your income. And I think that actually helps away from that global pay, because you mentioned, you know, San Francisco might be a tough market for you guys to compete with, but we want someone who, if they really love San Francisco or their family is there or whatever it may be that's keeping them in that location, we want to be able to support them there and ensure they have a quality of life equal to myself in Colorado, for example, or someone in Valencia, Spain, or somewhere like that.
I just want to say, like, as someone who's moved from the U.S. and to a country, I live in Spain now. Depending on which company I was working for, I would, you know, my salary would be affected in a myriad of different ways. So I've looked at that from multiple angles, and the way that it's worked out with Doist has worked out fine for me with the location multiplier. And I think just the point is starting with what Amanda just said last, that you want to make it equitable, you want to make it fair for people no matter where they're living. So wherever they go, they can live comfortably. It's not about making people rich if they're in one country or struggling in another. We want all of our teammates to be able to live comfortably. And so, yeah, remote work opens up all these opportunities to have choice and flexibility. And if you just sort of start with that and then build your compensation strategy from that vantage point, I think you're going to end up, regardless of where you end up, we all approach this slightly differently. But if you start from that point, then you're probably going to end up in a good spot in the end. And what I think too many companies try to do when they first start approaching this is they're thinking about it from a standpoint of fear, almost, of how do we make sure that the digital nomad doesn't get the best of us in this situation, or somebody's going to live in a place where it's different from where they say they are. And we find this barely happens. In fact, only 1% or less of any given of our team is nomadic at all. Most people are just living normal lives, and we use their tax residency to base where their location is. And so it's not, I just think it needs to be approached from that standpoint of what Amanda just mentioned, which is just giving people that flexibility and ability to live where they want, and then it'll all kind of fall into place after that.
Great. Really good questions, guys. So yeah, one more that's really interesting from the audience. And I think as inflation rates have shot up through the roof in the US and all over the world, thanks to printing a lot of money, the question is, how do you keep salary ranges updated and how often do you refresh them?
Yeah.
Who wants
I
to
can
go
take
first?
that real quick. And ours is we're constantly looking, because we're hiring so much, or we have been in the past. One is just the feedback we're getting from candidates on the salaries they're expecting, but also from our current employees. It's more informal data, but we always use that as a good indicator of where we're sitting in the market. And then we partner, we have a paid comp tool called COMSA, and it's really helpful, and they update their salary information and data every quarter. So we have a refresh on that as well. We currently have 2 compensation reviews each year as well. So they're more formal, they're structured, and it makes sure that everyone is meeting what we would consider minimum pay within their pay range of that role, and as well as based on their performance and things along those lines. And it also helps us do mid-market catch-ups and things along those lines.
My answer is quick. We're doing it annually and on a semi-annual basis reviewing, but we're actually doing updates annually.
Yeah, we're similar. We went from annual to semi-annual, and I'm really debating quarterly right now because some of it's moving so quickly on us, especially in the equity markets. It's challenging. So semi-annual right now, but stay tuned. You might see Carter doing quarterly reviews around this data.
I love it. We have so many questions, guys. It's like, I don't know where to start. I mean, Amanda, there's a bunch of questions for you, Chase, David. So I don't know if I should read like all of yours, Amanda, quickly, and then you can answer them, and then David and Chase, and then me. What do you think?
Yeah, Lona, that's what I was thinking as well. That's why I prioritize those in the Google Doc, because the questions are coming in faster than I can.
Okay, perfect.
See them.
So maybe Amanda, here we go, rapid fire. Where are you getting those benefits, those benchmarks, Amanda? So I don't know what they mean by benchmarks, but maybe
yeah,
you know?
I think I mentioned it earlier. So we do have that paid compensation tool that we're using. We're also exploring having a secondary tool as well, just to ensure that we are looking at a greater range and data points, but also we tend to outsource as well. So we could go to a third party or a consultant or somewhere. We've also met with external recruiting agencies, for example, to understand what trends they're seeing in the market, to make sure that we remain competitive, but also fair to all of our employees.
Okay, great. And then regarding minimum salary, Amanda, which is 40,000 USD, is that for every employee, regardless of role and seniority?
Correct, yes. So our total rewards page and philosophy is in our handbook, which is public if anyone wants to go look, but we do have that 40,000 minimum USD, no matter where they're based or their role or seniority.
Okay, and then the next one, Amanda, is how did you solve employer private pension scheme without having an entity?
Yeah. So we're actually really fortunate. That's our company's job, is to have those entities. So we do have entities for all of our employees, and we actually set up those benefits for our internal employees as well as our external employees, so our customers' employees. And what's really great is we have an amazing benefits team, but we also have an amazing employee base. And I say this a lot, but listening to your employees and hearing their feedback is really helpful.
And what I want to add here is that Remote actually is our biggest, one of our biggest partners for SafetyWing. So we provide the health insurance for all of the teams that Remote onboards. We're also going to add pensions as a benefit. So that will be rolling across the entire world. So you guys will be able to save for pensions regardless of where the country is. But yeah, quite interesting. Okay. So what is the name of the comp tool, Amanda, you just mentioned?
So we are using COMSA, K-A-M-S-A.
Okay, so maybe you can type that in the chat whenever you get a chance. Amanda, what is the name again of the provider you use for salary ranges?
Yeah, so I'll send the tool in the chat for you guys. And then, of course, there's additional consultancies that you can approach as well. But I'll send over in the chat the name.
Okay, what is the paid comp tool? Yeah, Amanda mentioned, I guess it's the same question. What was the name of the comp software Amanda is using? Okay, great. Okay, so then Amanda, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
The questions they had for you, and then maybe I'll go to David next, clockwise. So David, they say agree on total awards consideration. That said, several studies show that the #1 reason people are moving in the US is compensation.
Yes. Yeah, I bring some levity to it. I think when you look at the #1 reason, you have to, certainly take it seriously, but it's kind of like we saw in the polling earlier, right? The #1 reason was 38%, but the #2 reason was 33%. So you kind of have to, decompose that down a little bit. But I would say that, certainly the competitive market in the US around base compensation is the most competitive and probably most compelling reason for people to be moving around. Look, the bottom line is I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there's a burden in living here relative to money. And so a lot of people have moved out of these high cost labor markets and want to eventually stretch their dollar a little further. So we have to take that into consideration. But one thing I would say too is there's a lot of talk around cost of living in COLA. We look at cost of labor, we don't use cost of living. Inflation is what it is. So as an example, inflation is very high right now in the US. And so, people say, well, you should pay more. It's like, okay, no, that's fine, but you can't have it both ways. So when inflation goes down and drops to 2%, do we take money back? You have to be a little bit careful how you ratchet this up, right? Because ultimately you can't kind of go back on it. So we do use cost of labor versus cost of living to adjust our pay. And I think that creates some advantages. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I know we have limited time, but I think there's an advantage to staying with cost of labor versus cost of living. But certainly we're focused on the cash compensation in the US. That's a fact.
Okay, great, David. And then give us some more levers that you use for remote, that you are using for remote.
Yeah, I think probably some of our best received programs are around stipends, home office stipends, things we allow for utilities, internet, phones, etc. I think that allows a lot of flexibility. We have a lot of meal voucher programs, things like that. So within our offices, we provide food, meals, and snacks. And so for the remote workers, we kind of have the same thing paralleled in terms of these stipends. I would also say that trying to ensure that people feel as part of the community, right? When you're out of the office, and again, we're only 20% remote, so we spend a lot of time making sure people are really incorporated in our culture in terms of how we do that, and I think that helps. So I would also add in terms of child and dependent care, or I'll just call it dependent care. Make sure our remote workforce has access to those kinds of things so that, again, they can be engaged and really feel comfortable with those services. There's a challenge I think people have relative to that when you're at home. And if it be your dog barking in the background or having to take care of an elder parent or whatever it happens to be, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that remote work and working, from a home office. So we do have a lot of things in place to deal with those kind of eventualities that you wouldn't have if you were in the office.
Great. And last question for you, David, is how do you address pay equity when you have an employee move to a lower cost of living region, but don't adjust their pay, while those who started in that lower cost of living region are making less?
Yeah, you know what? That's probably our biggest challenge, and I think that's hitting the nail right on the head. That is a challenge for us. We don't have a ton of that, so right now it's although we're addressing it, it's not a huge issue for us, but that is the biggest challenge. And again, in terms of that methodology of kind of looking at comp ratio and freezing those salaries and letting the market catch up. And those people that are paid lower would be part of that market catch up, right? So they're moving in bulk. But we don't have large percentages of people where that's an issue for us right now. So, but definitely something we have our eye on and trying to figure out a good solution for.
Thank you, David. I'll go to Chase since we just have like 9 minutes left. How do you use location as a factor in an equitable way? I would worry about not having a strict rule around using location because of potential discrimination concerns, i.e., or example, not using the same factors for all people in the same weights.
I'm not sure I understand the question, Lona. Can you help me decipher?
How do you use location?
Because we are using location. We're using multiple factors that would weigh out pretty evenly, I think, but location just being one of them.
Right.
But
so
I'm sure there's something on it. It's user error. I'm missing it.
I didn't really totally understand the question myself. Yeah, Lana, can you read that again?
I can read it again. How do you use location as a factor in an equitable way? And then it goes, I would worry about not having a strict rule around using location because of potential discrimination concerns. I would worry about not having a strict rule around.
So we do have a strict rule around. Well, maybe I shouldn't use the word strict. We have a rule around using location. So we ask each teammate to list their location based on their tax residency. So we are sending them. They're receiving paperwork. They're receiving. They have to file their taxes. So what address do you put on the equivalent of your tax return, right? That's what we're using as your location. There are edge cases where we have people who split their time between a couple different places, or they are nomadic. So we address those on a case-by-case basis. I think something that David was alluding to, and something that I was alluding to earlier, which is let's not build for the edge case, let's build for the norm, and then deal with the edge cases as they come. So we do have a pretty strict rule in that regard, but then we will deviate from that a little bit if needed. But the location factor in your compensation formula will fluctuate how much you receive up or down depending on the cost of living where your location is.
Okay, I hope that answers the question.
I'm sorry.
If you need more clarification, please feel free to put another question. But I'll move on to my questions. I just have two, and then they were addressed to me. And then Charles, if you prepare maybe like one last one for the whole group, that would be great. So Lana, what was the international benefit company that you mentioned? When we inquired, we found these companies are cost prohibitive in terms of administrative fees charged to the company. Interesting question. So the international benefits company, that would be maybe us. So SafetyWing provides certain benefits, but then you'd go to remote.com, for example, Amanda, to use their software as well as their locations to hire people in different countries. So maybe, are you talking about their administrative fees are high? So maybe we can answer this in two parts. The health insurance part that we provide is actually quite great. It's at a very, very low cost compared to others, and it covers everyone everywhere the same. And actually, when you get it through remote, you get a huge discount. So we can definitely discuss that. But also Amanda can maybe answer that part where the administrative fees, or maybe this platform, so you can hire people that get high. So
yeah, absolutely. So we take care of everything from the employment agreements and contracts, the payroll, the compliance, and things along those lines. I do know that we have a flat fee per employee. So it's based on if you're paying month to month or over a year, you get a discount if you pay for one full year. And then in some locations, I think it's about 250 per month. I'd need to double check my numbers on that one because I know we recently updated some of that. But if you're ever concerned about the cost of it, definitely reach out to Remote and we'll be happy to discuss it with you guys. We find that we're really competitive in that space, but we also understand that there's startups and companies that maybe have a lower budget.
Great. And the last question for me was for non-location based comp at SafetyWing, how do you deal with comp for people based in different countries? Do you tie everyone to the US? Yes, mostly, but we do have maybe some other people on our team that are contractors that are not tied to the US. So the people that are hired full-time, they are tied to that one pay grade that is based in a middle tier city in the US, pretty much. So yeah, Charles, we can go to maybe one last question because it's 1:56.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm just going to pull back up the screen here as we start wrapping up here. But I have a lot of questions just about New York City and some of the changing stuff there. So let me just read one of these. There's actually like tons of questions in here about it. All right, so New York will have no transparency posting laws starting in April. How is that being managed for a distributed workforce?
That's interesting.
So,
to go first.
I can start because Colorado also has that requirement, and I'm based here. So it's pretty much you need to show a salary range or the expected salary of the person you would hire. So you don't necessarily need to input the exact amount because salary does fluctuate. There's usually a range that you have, but you do need to include it in your job posts, especially if you're posting in those areas. But I know that Colorado, I'm not sure about New York specifically, but Colorado specifically states, doesn't matter if it's not posted in Colorado itself. If you employ anyone in Colorado or you plan to, or you might, you do need to include that salary range in the job post.
I can't add anything to that. That's Amanda nailed it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's
so
pretty similar for right over everybody for the most part.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's compliance.
Yeah. And Charles?
Yeah, so I think with just the volume of questions that we're leaving unanswered, I think we just need to put our heads together as a group here and talk about after today's webinar is over, we can figure out how we best address some of the lingering questions out there. Yes. Maybe that's a recording, maybe that's sending individual responses. We'll figure that out and get back to everybody. So
yeah,
Lona, I'll let you
feel free to add us on LinkedIn and maybe send us questions. But yeah, we'll discuss with David and Amanda if it's okay for them to reach out directly or if we can answer them off sync, async. Great. Well, I think I want to thank everyone for coming here today. I hope that we were able to shed some more light into this compensation question that everybody has. As you can see, it is something that is constantly moving, so it's really hard to say one thing that will be the norm. We don't know. Everyone is creating this together, so as you are a participant in these companies, make sure that your voice is heard. And if you're leaving a company, make sure you tell them why you're leaving. That way, that company can adjust and hopefully create a better culture and space for those people that stay and also on board later. Please join us for the next webinar next month. And yeah, reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Chase and David. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Bye.